Okay, to start, I'm going to be duplicating this layer, as many of you probably already do. Now, once that layer is duplicated, I'll be taking care of larger items with the patch tool. The patch tool is on the left-hand side, looks like a square with little lines hitting it. I like to zoom in, and often I'll start from the upper left-hand corner of the screen and just start kind of working away at little things that I think might be distracting and that'll be difficult to get rid of with some techniques I'll be using in the future. Okay, I'm just moving around, finding bigger items, and just continuing to use the patch tool to clean things up to make my skin editing in the future a little bit easier. So most of the time, what I'm looking for are sort of larger texture or things that are maybe super shiny, little fine lines, things like that. Little patches of odd color sometimes. Again, I'm just patching things here and there, larger items that are pretty easy to see. And I'm going to continue patching, but you guys don't have to watch it all. All right, here you go. You can see the results of the patching. Everything here was done through patching. I haven't done anything else to the image. The patch tool is probably where I spend a lot of my time when I'm doing the skin stuff because it saves me a lot of time in the future. So the next thing I'm doing is kind of putting together a frequency separation thing going on. A lot of you guys probably already use this. If you turn off the texture layer, it makes it easier to kind of see the Gaussian blur. And what I try to do with my blur is move it along until basically all of the texture is gone and the color is looking pretty smooth in the transitions. Sometimes you can see it just from the overall photo, but sometimes you won't be able to tell as easily, and so I'll go into this little box and kind of zoom out and then zoom into an area that I know has texture and use that as my reference for how much Gaussian blur I'm going to need to make sure that the skin tones are smooth and but I haven't gone too far with the blur. Okay, it's looking like I'm getting about there. Good. All right, once that's done, I like to turn my texture back on, and I'll go in, and as is typical, you go to Apply Image and do what you need to do, selecting the color layer. In this case, I'm going to use Subtract. The other stuff defaults, so you don't have to touch anything. You just click OK. Okay, then you want to do the linear light blend mode. I'm sure all of this is already something you guys know, but in case you don't, that's what I'm doing. If you need better instructions for frequency separation, there's a bunch of tutorials on YouTube. People who are doing a much better job than me. So when I do my frequency separation, I like to do areas that are similar in brightness and saturation as well. But as I'm doing this box, you'll see me in a second go up and change the feathering because I was doing something else with a different image and I brought my feathering down too far. So I'm going to go over here and update my feathering. And usually for a picture this size, when it's a beauty portrait, I find 30 works pretty well. So I'm going to go in here. I'm just going to start selecting swaths of similar brightness and also color. I'll usually come to the edge of the next shade because of that feathering that's going to go on. And if you want to see how much you're blurring, you can go through Gaussian blur again like this, because otherwise the very first one kind of defaults to whatever your last blur was. Sometimes I don't want to use the same blur. And again, I'm just kind of working through different areas that I think are similar enough and that I want to sort of smooth out and blend together. The nose is usually 2 or 3 different regions in my experience. And once once all the Gaussian blur stuff is done on this color layer, you'll see later that it kind of flattens out the contrast. It just makes the image less punchy, but that's okay. I mean, for now, I'm kind of over blurring everything, and I'll touch it up later and add my own contrast. This is me starting to work on the texture layer. And I pretty much always use clone stamp on this. You can use other things, but my preference is clone stamp. And I'll typically kind of zoom in and take a look at any areas that I think could be blended better. And while I'm doing that, I mean, mine's set to current layer, but just make sure that yours is also set to current layer or it's not going to work appropriately. Okay. So this is one of the ways of getting rid of things that you thought maybe would go out in the color layer but didn't. And then also, if you wanted to correct some crazy texture, you could do it through the clone stamp tool on this layer as well. I try not to make anything too clean, because I don't want it to look super fake. So if you're seeing that I'm kind of going through and I'm getting rid of some stuff and I'm not getting rid of others, even though it looks similar, it's because I don't want it to necessarily be overly perfect. I want it to be clean and nice looking, but not perfect, because it looks, in my mind, it kind of creates a thing in your mind, where it just looks weird, where people can look at it and just know that something about it is strange, because no one's face is 100% perfect. So I try to get enough out of there that everything looks good, but not take too much. And that's just personal preference. I often like to pull back and get an overall look at the photo as I'm doing this, because sometimes when you're zoomed in, you won't notice that something is distracting. But when you zoom out, you'll see that even though maybe individually the little marks aren't creating a distraction, from zoomed out, they create kind of an aggregate distraction. And sorry if this audio sucks. I mean, I'm just recording this on my iPhone. I do have a mic running around somewhere, so if I do another one in the future, maybe I'll take the time to go grab that, and that way the audio can be a bit cleaner. So as you guys can see, I mean, this series of tools can be really powerful, because it's not like Sara looked bad before, but if you go through, you can really improve someone's texture, and even a professional makeup artist. I mean, they mess up sometimes, so you can go through and blend some of the makeup and things like that if you need to. Alright, so I just finished the frequency separation and was kind of rename that grouping, and I'm turning off and on for you guys so you can see where I left off with it. And I mean, I'm like a big believer. I think Chanel had a saying like, once you get dressed, take one thing off. And so even though I was pretty happy with it where it was, I did go a little hard with everything, so I backed it off to about 85%. Now I'm starting my dodge and burn process. I typically will start with the highlights, and so I'll create a curves layer and invert the mask, and then grab a brush tool. And primarily, I like to follow along natural highlights, but some of the modification that I might do is typically the center of the forehead, down the nose, a bit of the chin, kind of brighten that up a bit. It just kind of further helps to accentuate the face, in my opinion. It's the most flattering way to dodge and burn, in my opinion. So you'll see here, I'm just kind of slowly brightening up the forehead. Again, I'm at flow 1%, smoothing's about 30, and my opacity is 100%. There's a million different ways to do it, but those are the settings that I like to work with when I'm doing dodge and burn. It's harder to go overboard if you're doing it that way. So you'll see here, I'm kind of like following the highlights on the nose, just helping to add more contrast back in. That was sort of smoothed out by all of the frequency separation. And then here's another area that I'll like to come in and do to sort of brighten up the cheekbones, a little bit under the eye. I don't want to get rid of necessarily all shadowing underneath the eye, but I don't want it to be crazy. Luckily, on this particular image, the under eye shadows are pretty much non-existent. But again, this is still an area that I like to brighten up a bit, just because it helps shape the face. Okay, a little bit more on the nose. And I'll come in here and usually smooth out sort of the transition for the cheeks. And usually corners of the lips are a good place to kind of go in and a touch up. There's a natural highlight right here on her chin. I definitely want to brighten that up a bit. I'll probably brighten up the overall chin area as well. And again, it's all at like 1%, so it's small things. You can kind of gradually build it up as you think it's needed. Again, you just got to kind of look around and see what looks like it's just too awkward. And one of the areas I love to touch up is the Cupid's bow around the lips. In general, women aren't going to complain about having fuller looking lips, and I feel like, accentuating the Cupid's bow and adding some highlight around the edges of the lips tends to make them pop. And here I am, I'm going to go in and really accentuate this area. And I'm not really afraid of going a little bit far, because I know that at the end, just like my frequency separation, I'll probably end up backing off a bit on what I'm doing here. Another little natural highlight on the nose, helping to give it more dimension. This is another area I like to hit. The eyebrow, just underneath the eyebrows above the eyelid. I like to brighten that up a bit too. And then just kind of keep going around, looking at the transitions between the darks and the lights, seeing if anything is blending weird. When you back up, it makes it a lot easier to see areas that maybe you missed. And just come back through and slowly touch them up. I often will go on and off with this stuff because, you sort of start losing track of what you've done if you stare at the screen with the thing turned on too long. outside of the patch tool, this is probably the second area that I spend the most time. Coming in here and just slowly dodging and burning items until everything looks good to me. You can see here I feel like the transition between the cheek and the lip and the cheek and the jaw were a little bit not to my liking, so I'm going to go in there and brighten some of that up. And I'll rename this layer the light layer in case I forget later. Although I typically start with the light layer, once in a while I'll start with the burning layer. And when I do that, it jacks me up when I do the blend diff sliders later. Anyway, so here I'm going to go, and again, I'm going to work on the nose, add a bit more contrast in there. Following natural shadows, just kind of deepen them up a bit. Come back into the Cupid's bow. Again, I like to really accentuate the Cupid's bow. Give it a lot of 3-dimension. Make those lips really pop. Okay, I'll come under here and sort of just, again, add some more dimensionality to that chin. And in towards the inside of the mouth, I'll add a little bit of darkness for the lips. Again, I'm just rounding them out. Now, the other area, is this the cheekbone. You want to highlight those cheekbones. So I'll come in there and add a bit of burn just underneath the highlight that we worked with earlier. And if I want, I'll go and look and try to accentuate the jawline a bit. And you can come through and just add a little bit of shadow underneath on the neck. And it'll help separate that jawline. Sometimes there'll be a shadow there naturally or a highlight there naturally, and I'll go back through and just kind of make that pop. But in this one, the light's a little bit more smooth, so I'll add that shadow to the neck. Now, just like before when I added brightness just underneath the eyebrow, now I'm going to come in and darken up the makeup a bit because it adds a bit more saturation and a bit more contrast to the image when I do it this way. Hit both sides. Take a look at it. All right, so one of the other areas that I like to hit are the eyeline. And I'll kind of make a, I forget what that's called, where they put the black pencil eyeliner. I'll kind of make some fake eyeliner, or if there's already eyeliner, I'll deepen the color, or make it darker rather. Okay, let's come over to the other eye and we'll do something similar. This time I'm going to go a little bit heavier just because it's a little blurrier over there so people might not notice. Okay, and you can see she does have a little bit of eyeliner there, but I'm just going to go ahead and take this through and darken it more. I'm going to go back to 1% because I've got another area here that I'm going to darken up, and that is the eyebrows. I love to darken up the eyebrows. Again, it's just another way of adding contrast to the image and making things a little bit more striking. Okay, now we can back off. Let's see what happened with that. I'm liking it a lot. Okay, so rename this layer the dark layer. Next thing I'm going to do is my blend diff sliders, and this is the light option layer. So I'm going to tell it to blend if the image is dark because I don't want it necessarily getting rid of the dark blacks. So do the opposite on the dark layer. You're holding the option key to separate that arrow, and I typically back off so that if I accidentally hit one of the brightest brights, my burn won't do anything to it. So I'll rename this group the dodge and burn for the face. And here you go, on and off. And like I said, I'm going to go back this off just a tad because I think that once you do something, you should always back it off a little bit. Even if you think it's perfect, I would back it off a little bit. All right. So I'm going to do another dodge and burn session, but this one's going to be focused on the eyes. So again, I'm starting with the bright curve, inverted that mask, and I'm going to come over to the eye and zoom in so I can see it really well because I want to kind of focus my my highlight here. I'm going to go through and hit the brighter areas of the eye with this brush to just further brighten them up. There we are. A little bit more. I often will start broad and then kind of narrow down. I like catch lights, so I frequently will come in here and brighten up catch lights. Same with the other eye. Since my thing was already small, my brush was already small, I went ahead and touched up that catch light. And now I'm kind of working in reverse where I started smaller brush and I'm getting bigger. And what I'm trying to avoid is kind of hitting the dark edges. Okay, so now let's take a look and see where we went. See how I like it. Okay. Let's see. All right, so now we're going to do a blend diff slider again. And I move the eye to the upper corner so I can see it. I'm going to bring this out so it's not really affecting the darks and the mediums, the middle grays. And I'm definitely not wanting it to affect anything black, which is why even after I split this, I moved it. And if you'll look now, it primarily brightens just the bright areas and leaves the darker stuff behind. In my opinion, it looks a little bit more natural, even though I'm doing something unnatural. I want it a little bit brighter in the middle, so I'm going to come through with my brush and just kind of highlight some of those things. All right, now I think I'm liking it. Name this light eye. And now we're going to do the opposite. We're going to come through and burn. So if you look at the eye, you'll see the outside is naturally darker. So I'm just going to come through here and accentuate that dark area. One of the things that happens when you burn and you leave the blend mode on normal is that it typically increases the saturation a bit too. So you'll see later on I'll kind of hit the yellow area as well because I want that to kind of increase the saturation a bit on that. Okay, you kind of see what I've done. Let's move over to the other eye and do something very similar. Hit those edges to darken up the dark line around the perimeter. Okay, getting a little bit bigger, come through. I mean, I usually hit the pupils. I don't think I need to hit the pupils on this particular image, but it's just kind of a habit of mine, to be honest. All right, so I'm moving the eye again to the upper left-hand corner so I can go through, do my blend diff slider. This time I don't want the darks to be affecting the bright areas, so I'm going to come down until it's in the shadows while it blends. I'm just kind of looking to see how much it's affecting the eye. It's not having a huge impact. But I'm going to back it off quite a bit because I don't want any of the bright areas to be darkened. All right, good. So it's really sticking to the dark areas in this burn layer. Go ahead and forgot to rename it, so let's rename it. Okay, dark eye. And as we back off, I'll create a group with these, and this will be the dodge and burn eye. And let's see. All right, cool. But again, I'll probably back this off in the opacity. And I think 85 should be good. Yeah, so it's there, but not too not too bright. Okay, grouped everything together and just calling it dodge and burn. Now you can kind of see the effect of all the dodging and burning that's been done. And so now one of the last steps is to do sharpening. And so I'll usually duplicate all of my edits into their own group because I'll need to merge all these layers. And if I decide later on that something is wrong, it's really easy to resharpen, but it's not easy to redo all this shit I just did. So I save those, and if I don't need them later, I'll go ahead and flatten everything out, but just in case. Anyway, here I'm going to do the Gaussian blur 4.5. It's my personal preference for sharpening. And then you go into the other and do high pass filter. It's going to look a lot like we're doing frequency separation. Make sure the radius matches. So whatever you do for the blur, make your radius match on the texture layer. And linear light again. And I'll go ahead and group these up. Okay, and we'll call this sharpening. I'll zoom in and kind of show you guys. It's way over sharpened, right? I mean, this is not a good looking sharpening. So I'll add a layer mask and invert it, and then I can apply sharpening where I want. I typically sharpen the eyes first. I often will start at 50%. Use my brush, fill it in, do a stroke, see how I like it, and see if it needs more. Okay, it looks pretty good, but I'm going to add a little bit more, I think. Sharpen it up a bit more. Let's see. All right, I'm happy with that, I think. So we'll go over to the other eye. It's not sharp. I'll still add a little bit of sharpening on it anyway. Okay. So now we're going to go and do the lips, and I'll bring my flow down to 25% for the lips. Again, it's just my personal preference. That's what I like for the lips typically. All right, cool. Next thing, we'll go and work on probably some more of the eye. This doesn't need as much sharpening, so I'll bring it down to 10% and kind of hit the lashes and the underlids. There we go. And the eyebrows. Okay. And this particular image has a flower, so I'll probably just hit a few areas on the flower too, sharpen that up a bit. I doubt it's going to make a huge difference, but, you know, it won't hurt either. There we go. Okay. Just about done. All right, so that's it. That's it sharpened. Can't really see as much when you're backed out, but anyone who zooms in will be able to tell. Okay, now I'm going to start kind of merging the layers together because I don't think I need to do anything in the adjustment layers. And when this is done, I can show you a before and after for everything. So that's before, after. All right, I hope you guys like this.